There was a Jewish woman in California who led a medical group to support people in the occupied territories, children particularly.
Mm.
And they asked me to come as a medical doctor, come and visit with them so that we can look at health conditions in Palestine under the occupation.
What year was this?
It would have been in the early 90s, during the first Intifada. So I went to the refugee camps in the occupied territories. I went to Gaza. I cried every day for 2 weeks. I cried every day for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I thought, and I used to believe that this was right.
Yeah.
The daily humiliations, the arrogance of the army, the incredibly self-inflated power and I use the word arrogance again, of the settlers. The sheer evil injustice of it. According to Israeli documents, the average settler got 6 times as much water as the average Palestinian. So I could arrive from Vancouver, become a settler tomorrow. I'd have the right to live in a settlement with a swimming pool. The Palestinians don't have the right to dig wells on their own land. Because to dig wells, they have to have permit. But they don't get permit. So if they dig a well, the army comes and fills them full of stones.
Right.
The burning down, they talked about Palestinian tree terrorism. When I used to go to synagogue here, I can barely set foot in a synagogue anymore for what I want to hear there. No, there are exceptions. They're really good religious Jews and rabbis, really open-minded, sweet, humane people. I'm talking about the unconsciousness and ignorance of the majority. They talked about Palestinian tree terrorism. You know why? Because in the occupied territories, there's something called the Canada Forest. Trees planted with Canadian funds, Jewish, mostly Jewish donations. And the Palestinians would sometimes come and sneak in and burn down some of those trees. So they talked about tree terrorism. Well, what they didn't know is, and didn't want to know, is the Canada Forest was built at the site of Palestinian villages that were destroyed and bulldozed over by the Israeli army in 1967. And the settlers regularly burned down Palestinian olive groves, which is their livelihood, the olive oil. And then they prayed it in the synagogues about tree terrorism. You know, and my children were studying for their bar mitzvah then, and so I went to services regularly. I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand up and say anything. You know, at that time I couldn't. So I witnessed this. I cried for 2 weeks. I came back and I wrote about it. That's the first time I went back. I went to Gaza. Who are the Gazans? 70% of them were, in the 1990s, still either the direct refugees, people who had been expelled by main force from a few miles away, where from across the barbed wire, they can view their lands being tilled by new immigrants and new Israelis. These are the Gazans. And they're living in these hovels. This is in the 1990s. Now, I went back again in early 2000s after the Oslo Accords, which is a complete sellout of the Palestinians by their own leadership. And because they never stopped the right for the Israelis to keep settling the land and keep taking over the land. And we again went to the territories. It was marginally better then because in the aftermath of Oslo there was some hope. But I could tell that this was going nowhere because the settlements were expanding.
And Gaza, just so people know, Gaza Strip anyways, is I think it's 5 miles by 24 miles with 2 or 3 million people. Like it's
I mean,
compacted.
there's an Israeli, again, anybody who's listening and thinks this is Arab propaganda, there's an Israeli sociologist, Baruch Kimmerling, who said that Gaza is the world's largest concentration camp.
Wow.
which it is. You know, and so again, I'm telling you, don't listen to me. I'm just a Canadian, Hungarian Canadian. Listen to the Israelis who talk like this. Then I went back again last year,
Okay.
2022. I was asked to go and work with Palestinian women as a trauma healer. I was asked to go back and work with Palestinian women who'd been tortured in Israeli jails because the torture is relentless. It's, what can I say?
Yeah.
They know how to torture people. One woman told me that she was being interrogated and she began to menstruate. She began to bleed through her clothing. They pointed at her, they mocked her. So I was asked to go back and work with women with PTSD as a result of being tortured in Israeli jails. And one woman told me that there's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. It's ongoing. You know, I mentioned that poll in Canada where most Canadians knew nothing or little about the residential schools. It's the same in Israel.